Hola class. So it's holidays now. I hope you are enjoying yourself and I hope you're managing to get out in the garden just for a little bit each day because it's a lovely time of year. I've been at the allotment today and that's why I'm so scruffy. So, chapter 6. Now before I start chapter 6, I just want to say how awesome my dad is because he's made me some seed boxes for plants, for seeds, for vegetable seeds. So I'm really, really excited about that. And they look really exciting. So chapter 6. Now, if I remember correctly, clock's going. What had just happened? Okay. So she or he had found out that their mum was a cryptozoologist, who's somebody who studies animals that may or may not exist. So a cryptozoologist studies things like the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and things that, you know, some people don't believe in, some people do. So that's what her mum is. And Darwin was called a Coochie, I think, and Sheba's a Catchie, and Taurus is a water bull. So she's got all these animals and they're all mythical creatures that people don't think exist. So, chapter 6. Let's see what happens next. The next day was Monday. Technically, I should have spent the day completing the work that Mrs. Toy had set me. Mum insisted that I did the reading and maths work before even thinking about going outside. But it didn't matter how interesting my learning was, my eyes kept wandering towards the giant window in the kitchen. The sun was shining, the moorland gleamed under the warmth, and I just did not want to do anything inside. I'd never felt the urge to go outside this strongly before, but then I'd never had all of this on my doorstep before. I mean, the town was great and I was near my friends, but everything out the door here promised fun and adventure. I read through the textbook page again, hoping that I would understand it this time. Mum wandered in to check if I needed anything, and I mumbled a reply before turning back to the radius and circumference of circles. I read it, but I didn't take any of it in. Maths was not my favourite subject. I spent most of the time pretending that I understood it, while I desperately hoped that we wouldn't have to do a worksheet or a test. Part of my mind was telling me that it was daft not to tell Mum that I was struggling, but I didn't quite know her well enough. Not yet. I looked out the window and watched Taurus plodding gently through the field. Darwin lay next to me, as eager as I was to be allowed outside, but he couldn't leave the house without one of us. The other day had shown me why. The sooner you get that page done, the sooner you can go outside, Mum said, sitting down at the opposite side of the table. That's the last thing you need to do today. Don't you think my time would be better spent looking for the Lavellan? You wanted me to help you. Yes, I did, Mum nodded, staring at me defiantly. But if you really want to help me in the long run, you'll study and get good marks so you can become whatever you want. I groaned. What was it with adults and their obsession with getting good marks? They said all you had to do was try your best. But most of them didn't actually believe it. Let me see, Mum smiled as she pulled the textbook towards her. She read through it once and then got the paper and pencil out. I was kind of hoping she was just going to do the page for me, but she just drew a circle and gave me the paper. The Lavellan is at the centre of the lake, she said, pointing to the circle. Draw it, please. I looked at her like she'd gone mad. But her face didn't change. She just stared at me while she waited for me to draw the Lavellan. I drew it as best I could, in the centre, but I wasn't entirely sure what it looked like. That's really good, she nodded. Now, if we stand at the edge of the lake, she pointed to the edge of the circle, and we need to get to the Lavellan in the centre, we travel the radius of the circle. I began to understand what Mum was doing. and I went along with it. As we continued through this strange maths lesson, I realised I was starting to understand what these words actually meant. We kept learning like this until I felt as though I was finally able to complete the page. Mum didn't leave as I started the page though. She stayed sitting there, flicking through the pages in my science textbook. Although I still wasn't quite prepared to admit it, although I wasn't still quite prepared to admit it, in some strange feeling that it would upset Dad even though he wasn't there, I was happy that Mum was here. I was happy that I was with Mum. I grinned down at my textbook as I continued the tasks. "That's done," I exclaimed, and before Mum could stop me, I leapt from my chair and went to grab my coat and wellies. Darwin leapt up quickly too, so his paws slid and skidded on the floor. I didn't look back to see if my mum was cross, but Darwin and I ran in the direction we had gone in before. A full morning of being cooped up inside had made me ravenous for this walk, and I grinned at nothing as we headed towards the stream. Lying awake last night, I'd had a strange thought that the thing I'd heard splashing into the water had somehow been the Lavellan. Okay, so the rational side of my brain told me that this was very unlikely, but I wasn't going to listen to that right now. I'd forgotten how far from the house the stream had been, and I gave up running once we had zoomed down the first hill. Darwin slowed down to keep next to me, but every now and then he would prance forward a little, as delighted as I was to be outside. I heard the stream before I saw it. It had been raining last night, and the water was rushing faster off the moorland. When we heard it, Darwin trotted ahead to get a drink from the stream. I watched him as I walked over the rise and hoped that he wasn't going to scare the Lavellan away. I sat down on the heather before I remembered that it had rained, as I felt the damp soak into my clothes. Ah well, I thought, there's no use getting up now. The sun was scorching and I'd be dry very soon. I scanned the river, hoping for a glimpse of something that might look a little bit like a rat or a hamster. As my eyes started to ache for staring so much, I realised that it was very unlikely I'd see it, unless it moved. And what would make it move? I sprang to my feet and rushed down to the stream, staring at the grasses at the side. I made as much noise as I could, stomping my feet, making strange gull-like noises that caused Darwin to leap out of the water and bound up to me, thinking I wanted to play. Together, we made an absolute racket. Then I stopped and stood very still. There had been a rustling. I'm sure I had heard it. We were almost in the long grasses by the side of the river, and I was sure I'd heard something moving about in them. I shushed Darwin, who stood panting for a while, getting his breath back. His black fur had absorbed the heat, and he laid down exhausted. Then I heard a splash. Peering over the tall grass, I gazed into the rushing water. There was something swimming, which kept ducking underneath the water and coming up for air. It was larger than a mouse, and smaller than an otter, but I couldn't make out what it was. I kept seeing the wet brown shape show itself every now and then as it made its way to the other side. The river wasn't wide, but I didn't like the thought of crossing it when the water was so fast. I stayed where I was, hoping I would get a better view when it reached the other bank. Eventually, the small creature heaved itself up on the bank, and I grabbed my pocket binoculars Mum had lent me. To begin with, I couldn't find it, and I began to worry that it had run away. I scanned the bank, but nothing. Wait, there was something. I'd caught sight of something. I peered through the binoculars and finally saw what had been swimming across the river. My heart skipped a beat, and then sank when I realised it was a rat. It now sat on the other bank, catching its breath, watching me as though it wanted to laugh. I almost threw the binoculars in the river in frustration. He was foolish to think that I could find the Lavellan on the first day of trying, but it was the disappointment of thinking I'd succeeded that really kicked me in the stomach. I didn't feel like looking anymore, and my trousers were wet from where I'd sat on the heather. I began trudging up the hill, but Darwin wouldn't come. "Come on," I called. Darwin was sniffing around the long grasses where the rat had come from. He would step into the grasses and then jump back. This happened a good 3 times, but I wasn't in the mood for these games. "Darwin!" I shouted, and the dog looked at me, but growled at the grasses. I groaned and began walking up the hill, whistling so he'd follow. He did, looking back every now and then. I was not in the mood to play with whatever he'd found. I missed, therefore, the creature that was crouching in the grasses, watching us trudge back to the house. And that's the end of the chapter. So, chapter 7 will be on Thursday. I will try and post it up for Thursday morning. I am sorry I didn't get this posted up this morning. I only wrote it like an hour ago, so I am sorry about that. So I will see you guys on Thursday then, and I hope you have a lovely couple of days. Bye!